Okay. Welcome to our lecture today about modern-day slavery in the Netherlands. On behalf of Student Generaal and Escaping Barcode Life, I would like to warmly welcome all of you and thank you for your coming. We really appreciate your concern and interest in this topic we're going to discuss tonight. My name is Hannah. I'm part of the movement Escaping Barcode Life. Maybe you have already heard about it. We are doing this lecture with Student Generaal in order to raise the awareness about modern-day slavery in the Netherlands and in other places. The aim of our campaign is to educate ourselves and others about the far-reaching impact of slavery today and to learn about the supply chains in our neighborhoods and in our countries. The maybe even more important part for us is to see where we can target modern-day slavery, where we can transform our knowledge into actions, and where we can contribute to really abolish modern-day slavery, so that we can work together in a global community of freedom, humanity, and dignity. Today, there are still about 30 million slaves. That is more than at any other point of human history. And they are not as far as we might think away. They're living in the EU, in the Netherlands, and even in Groningen. In 2012, 1,700 people were registered as victims of human trafficking in the Netherlands, and the unreported cases, the number of the unreported cases might be even higher. In the first part of our lecture, Corinne Dettmeijer will explain us how the Netherlands works as a source, transit, and destination of human trafficking, and for sex slavery and other forms of forced labor. Afterwards, our co-speaker, Vries, will shed light on the reality of slaves in Groningen. After the two lectures, you all will have the opportunity to ask questions to both of them and get a discussion. But first of all, I would like to warmly welcome Corinne Dettmeijer. She's the Dutch National Rapporteur on Human Trafficking in Human Beings and Sexual Violence Against Children. She reports to the Dutch government on the nature and extent of human trafficking in the Netherlands and on the effects on government policies pursued. Her reports contain information, recommendations on relevant regulations, as well as on persecution and on support for victims. For the next 45 minutes, she will share her insights about modern-day slavery in the Netherlands and the form in which it exists today. Thus, we're really pleased to introduce Corinne Dettmeijer, and please give a warm welcome to her.
Does it work now? No? Oh. Yeah, it worked now? Okay, I don't hear it. Well, thank you for your introduction. And I will try and give you some insight into what we mean when we talk about human trafficking, trafficking human beings in the Netherlands and worldwide. Hannah said that together we might abolish modern-day slavery. I've been in this field too long to have that illusion, but together we can do something about it, and I think that should be the object. I am an independent institute, and that's important. Why is that important? I report on the scale and nature of human trafficking and sexual violence against children, but I'll stick to the human trafficking for now, for this evening. But I do that independently, and that means that I make my reports. I do the research that I want to do. I do quantitative and qualitative research, and sometimes the qualitative research lead me to looking for the numbers, looking for the figures of a phenomenon that I've viewed, and sometimes the data lead me to more qualitative research. And it's a good thing that it's not a job that you tick off the boxes. Did I do this? Did I do that? No, I have to be creative enough to find what areas of the fighting of human trafficking are not yet covered. I was in, before a joint committee of the House of Lords and the House of Commons last week in London, and there too they want to have a figure like a national rapporteur. And they have a new anti-slavery bill, and they asked me to give evidence on their bill and to talk to them a little bit about the Dutch system. And they said, well, the anti-slavery commissioner, as they would call it in the UK, would have to send in a report to the minister for approval before publishing it. How is it in your country? I said, I wouldn't want a job like that, because then you might just as well work for the government and write down what the government would like to see. That has nothing to do with independence. When we're talking about trafficking in human beings, what we see is that, like our article in this, well, this is the wording which is practically verbatim copied of the Palermo Protocol. And it is, there are some actions like recruiting, housing, harboring, sheltering, moving of a person with the intention of the exploitation. And when you see trafficking, you think, okay, they have to go cross-border because trafficking is from one country to the other. No, I think trafficking was a wrong word to use. In Dutch it's called handel, which also means that there's an intent of somebody, well, moving somebody else to another person. But that's not really what the Palermo Protocol is all about. It is, you can even, for instance, if I would be a Chinese restaurant keeper and 3 Chinese illegal persons would come and ask me for a job to work in that in my kitchen, and I would take them on, I would say that's okay, I would pay them, say 50 cents an hour, work them 12 hours a day, that, according to our Supreme Court, is trafficking. And then it's other people who come to me. There's not an action of me as a restaurant keeper that incites these Chinese cooks to come and work for me. So sometimes there's also a misunderstanding. What's the difference between trafficking and smuggling? You could put it this way. With smuggling, the state is the victim. Smuggling is getting people in your country that the country doesn't want to be there. Trafficking, then the people are the victims. And sometimes smuggling ends in trafficking or exploiting people. But it is a different concept. And when we look at trafficking, the core of the whole article is the intent to exploit somebody. So in this example I gave you from the Chinese restaurant, it's the intent to exploit even after those illegal cooks come to the restaurant keeper and ask him for a job. He thinks, oh, this is easy. I know they're vulnerable because they're illegal. They have nothing to eat. They have no place to live. I can take advantage of them and exploit them. So this is really important to know about the essence of trafficking. Now, when we look at trafficking, here I need, this didn't. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to. I can't see this. Well, the effect
it ought to
of this
concern every
should be
person,
completely different.
because it is a debasement of our common humanity. It ought to concern every community because it tears at our social fabric. It ought to concern every business because it distorts markets. It ought to concern every nation because it endangers public health and fuels violence and organized crime. I'm talking about the injustice, the outrage of human trafficking, which must be called by its true name, modern slavery.
It ought to concern every nation, and it ought to concern everybody. It tears at the fabric of our society, and that is really what it does. Whether it's trafficking for sexual exploitation or trafficking for labor exploitation, organ removal, all different kinds of trafficking are around us, and everybody should be aware of this. If we talk about exploitation and trafficking, there are different forms. The Palermo Protocol talks of sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, organ trafficking, and the new forms of trafficking could be held under the Palermo Protocol, but are not named as such. But in the new EU directive, which I will go into later, we see that there are new forms of trafficking that have led already to convictions in the Netherlands for trafficking, and what they all have in common is that somebody can earn a lot of money from it, and that is really also one of the things that's at the core is the exploitation. The other one is that the perpetrator wants to earn money from it. It is more lucrative than weapon trafficking or drugs trafficking, because people you can traffic again and again and again and again, whereas drugs, once you've sold them, they're out of your control. And if we look at the slavery of the old times, the slavery that we thought had been eradicated, at that time when you bought a slave, you paid good money for him or her. So it was your property, and you had to take care of him or her, and maybe you would have said it at that time, in a way. Nowadays, people migrate out, sometimes out of poverty, sometimes for other reasons, and they are such easy targets that if they have been either run away or die or are too sick to work or are too old to be in prostitution, well, they'll get new ones. And this is something that makes it really different from slavery as we know it from before the abolition. So we look at sexual exploitation. Well, you can see here the red light district in Groningen. And there was a girl called Olga, and she came from Bulgaria. And in one of these houses, she's been exploited. She was exploited, I think, during 8 years, which is a really, really, really long time. Olga had gone to the gymnasium in her hometown. She was a clever girl, but of course it was a small town and there was not much to be earned there. And she knew, and she was told, you can earn money when you go into prostitution in the Netherlands. And Groningen, there was a sort of direct line between Bulgaria and these two small villages and Groningen. So she knew she was going into prostitution. And sometimes people think, well, if you know you go into prostitution, well, then, I mean, well, how can you complain about being exploited? I mean, what did you think? That's not true. It's like maybe 20, 30 years ago you would say a prostitute cannot be raped. We think about that differently now. Even if you go into prostitution yourself, that doesn't mean you are asking for, you have to expect to be exploited. It's the same when you work in agriculture. If there are people who are exploited when they pick berries, for instance, or work in the greenhouses, you're not saying, well, what do you think? I mean, you work in agriculture. That's an environment where many exploitation takes place. No, you think, okay, you want to work there, you're entitled to your own money, and in the Netherlands, prostitution is an occupation that is legal. So this Olga had worked there for 8 years before she was able to tell her story, and I think that this had something to do with the way the police monitored the prostitution area in the Netherlands. But it did take 8 years. And now she is studying. She was rescued from this environment. I met her and I heard her speak. I was really very impressed by her. I heard her speak in Bulgaria in front of a whole audience, including the prime minister, and she told her story, and she was wearing a wig because she was still very scared, and rightly so. But she was telling her story to add to prevention schemes in her home country. She couldn't undo what had happened to her, but she could help to prevent others from getting the same plight. And if we look at our prostitution policy, well, you've seen the Nieuwstraat, and I'm sure this is not this relatively small town, so everybody must know where this is. In the year 2000, the Netherlands lifted the ban on brothels, which meant that the exploitation, earning money from prostitution was legalized. I advised in 2007 to change this regulation of prostitution, because I thought that, and this is what I advised, that every form of prostitution should be part of this bill, because before, around the time of 2000, many escort agencies weren't licensed. And if you see the difference between the bill of 2000 and the new bill that still has not been accepted by Parliament, nowadays everything is allowed unless it is forbidden by regulation. In the new law, nothing is allowed. Everything concerning prostitution is forbidden unless it has a license that it is legal. So that is really another way of looking at prostitution. Now, there's quite a discussion about prostitution, and it's a discussion that is characterized sometimes as the difference between the Swedish, nowadays Nordic model, and the Dutch, German, Swiss model, where there's more of a regulation. What I find difficult to see is why this discussion is always seen from a moral point of view. It is very difficult to have a discussion on what we want with prostitution without, in the Netherlands, without somebody saying, oh, this is old-fashioned, you're not liberal, and you are a prude, which is not really what this is all about. What you should look at is which policy causes the least trafficking in human beings, and we can't really give an answer to that yet. The other way that people are being exploited is in labor. These are shrimp cracker bakers, cookers. Well, they had to bake shrimp crackers in The Hague somewhere, and here this case was found because, or discovered because it was a terrible smell. At the attic of this house somewhere in The Hague, 40 people lived, cooked these shrimp crackers that had to be done at a real high heat, and the cockroaches were everywhere. The heat was unbearable, and so it stank. And this very bad smell led the neighbors to report it to the housing committee, and then this is what they found. I don't know why the ads are there, but a sweatshop where, you saw this perfectly ordinary mother with her small child. This can be everywhere and anywhere. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you would not see these signs that maybe this woman wasn't there voluntarily. You see the man closing the curtain. He doesn't want anybody to look in there. So this is one of the signs that you can see when we look at labor trafficking. It can be in sweatshops, in agriculture, in catering, restaurants, in all sorts of different, mostly dirty or dangerous or low-paying manual work, where people sometimes offer themselves, sometimes they're misled, and very often there's an abuse of their vulnerable position. Now, the third form of trafficking is organ trafficking. And when we look at the kidneys and the livers and the whatever you can buy, I think it's only really the kidneys now. Well, the heart maybe, but I don't know. Anyway, with the technology, this will change. It'll be more and more and more that you can buy organs. And you can buy organs in Iran, you can buy organs in Pakistan. You can't buy them in the Netherlands. Does that mean that in the Netherlands there are no illegal organ, there's no illegal organ operations? It might. I guess it would, because in the Netherlands it's mostly in hospital. But what about somebody who is on the list for an organ transplant? And, for instance, he comes from Pakistan originally, and he has his cousin who is a little poor living in Pakistan. How easy would it be to go there? So get off the list, go there, get a kidney, and come back to the Netherlands for checkups. We don't really know how often this happens. One thing we do know is that we should look into it. So the Minister of Health has started a research or commissioned a research project in this way. This is being done at the University of Rotterdam. And the other thing is one should be, how do you say that? What we see in these organs is that doctors would not really, wouldn't maybe do a transport like this themselves, but will they ask somebody who comes back from Pakistan with a new kidney where he got this from? Will they even think of, should they ask anything about it? Would they even consider that thought? I don't know, but this is something that we have to look in, and we do know that in other countries this is starting to get a bigger problem, and it might very well be that in 10 years' time the organ trafficking is one of the biggest, could be even bigger than the sex trafficking. And then we have the surrogacy, surrogate motherhood. You can have another woman carry your child in Spain. in some parts of the US. In India, in India it's about $20,000. In the UK it is, well, $120,000, $125,000. And in some states you can, in some states you can't. Not so long ago there was an article in the New York Times of two homosexual men who wanted a child, and they had a surrogate mother in California. They themselves lived in New York. And they said these different types of people being married or living together is increasing, so the laws should also adapt to the legal framework should, well, adapt itself to the technical possibilities. The Netherlands has said, okay, when you come here with a child that's been carried by somebody else, you can register this child here in the Netherlands as your own. But we do not condone surrogate motherhood. Now, this is sort of like throwing your problems over the fence and letting somebody else deal with it. And so I also recommended to our Minister of Justice that this is not really an okay way, because if you can use a body to give a service, like a woman, you can use a woman's body to get this service of carrying a baby, then you can know for sure that somebody in the end will get rich on that. Not everywhere, not maybe a woman in the US, but women in India who are very poor and who have the chance to earn money for this, they would. And then in the end they will be left with nothing. If we look, for instance, at the people who have sold their kidneys, after 5 years they're worse off, not only health-wise, but also financially. So this is really, I think, a problem that we will face more and more. And then we have some new forms of trafficking. Well, like slavery, you think this is old and of the past, Oliver Twist, but we have seen traffickers in the Netherlands who have been convicted of trafficking for letting their grandson, granddaughter, or another young person steal in a supermarket. And this is something that it's hard to fathom, but it happens. And you could, maybe 10 years ago, this would have been seen as stealing together, complicity to theft, with a 10-year-old who will not be prosecuted and a 60-year-old who will be prosecuted. But now it is seen as exploiting somebody else for the purpose of criminal effects. Begging is also one. We see a lot of beggars all over, and many of them have been there. Or you see also the selling of the street newspaper is a sort of a new form of begging. You see them, and very often, or not very often, sometimes they've been there for years. There may be a junk who plays the violin and sits there year in, year out, and is a sort of a familiar sight. But what we nowadays see is busloads of people who are brought in and scattered all over the town to beg, and in this way earn the money for the trafficker. We've seen this, for instance, in Greece, where there were Albanian children who were put on the street to beg. And then there was a big campaign in Greece to stop giving them anything, because that would end the trafficking for the purpose of begging. Now, Hannah said 1700. That's what we think. This was the registered amount in 2012. Of course, there's also always a dark number, but in the number up there, up till 1711, there are also false positives. So it's false negatives and false positives, which means that we don't really know how many we are talking about. We do know that from those that we know, the victims that have been registered, that about 20% is men, and that about a third of the victims, registered victims, are Dutch, which is very often a surprise for many people. When I tell them about the loverboy system that we are familiar with in the Netherlands, the internal trafficking, they think, oh yes, well maybe that too is human trafficking. Well, there's no maybe about it. Oh, what did I do? I think if I do this, it'll go away. Yeah. The loverboy, well, loverboys, as we know them in the Netherlands, I hate that word because it suggests something that it really is not, is more and more being seen now by other countries. The US, Canada, the UK. It used to be that many of these girls who would run away from home and get into prostitution would be seen as just that, girls with problems, sometimes borderline problems, whatever, runaway problems with authority, and not lead to a quest for who's behind this girl, who puts her up to this prostitution, and who gets the proceeds of what she's doing. And what we now see is that in many other countries, internal trafficking is more recognized for what it is. And why is it so difficult to spot? Well, for once, they are very often scared. Scared for threats. Sometimes the threats could never be fulfilled, but nevertheless, when there is this threat, well, that sort of disables you from going to the police. If you think that the police are corrupt, you won't go there and tell them that you've been exploited, and you've been told that the police are corrupt, and you come from a country where they're corrupt. Well, then you believe that, and it's also the consistency of the threats or the consistency of the physical abuse. If you've been hit very often, in the end, just having somebody looking at you will get the same result as when you are being abused. So this is some of the things that we see. What we also see is that victims deny it, and we see that a lot with the internal trafficker, with the victims of loverboys. They think they're still in love with the men, or people sometimes see it and they pretend not to see it. And that is something that we also see. I've done a research into the municipalities and what their role could be in the battle against human trafficking. And one of the municipalities said, well, we have a lot of agriculture around our town, but they, with this crisis that there is, and they have a difficult time more than enough, we're not going to look too closely into what they're doing, how the housing and how the people that work there are being housed, or how the work conditions are. And that, of course, is ridiculous. But this is one of the things that we see as well. And what you also see is that, well, for instance, if any one of you goes home tonight and you will, I hope not, but let's say you're robbed in a street near here, you will know what time it is because you've been to a Studium Generale, you know how late it ended, at what time it ended, so you know about the time. You will also know the street because you know the town, you know which street you're walking in. You might give a description, maybe not, but you also know what's been stolen because it's your bag, you know what's in it. Now, these girls sometimes can tell you maybe, well, I don't know, it took weeks before we were there. It was a house with a tree in front and there was a gas station 2 blocks away. Well, sometimes the police do these circles with them to try and find the place where they've been exploited. But can you imagine how hard it is if the object of exploiting you, well, sometimes leads to disorientating you. They don't want you to know, the trafficker doesn't want you to know when and where everything happens. They want you not to know, and they do everything to get that. They put you in Groningen, then in Amsterdam, then in Rotterdam, and if you're a girl from Sierra Leone or a small village in Albania, you have no idea what's happening. You don't speak the language. So that's difficult for them. Now this is something that you, I'm sure, have seen. Oh, I have to go back because this is really nice. We do it like this.
And the Oscar goes to... "12 Years a Slave." Brad Pitt, Diddy Gardner, Jeremy Kleiner, Steve McQueen, and Anthony Katagas, producers. Everyone deserves not just to survive, but to live. This is the most important legacy of Solomon Northup. I dedicate this award to all the people who have endured slavery and the 21 million people who still suffer slavery today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, 21 million, he said. NRC Next called me and said, "Is that true, 21 million?" Because they wanted to do a fact check. And I said, I don't really know. It might be more, it might be less. So what did I want the NRC to write about this? I said, well, the most important thing is we don't really know how many. 21 million is one of the estimates that we've seen. I think 21 million is also the estimate that Obama names. It's really based on something like this, so not on facts at all, but it's about awareness. So I said, it could very well be true, so they said, okay, fact. If we look at the international context of human trafficking, we see several important treaties that are at the basis of well, the way we have constituted in our laws human trafficking. Palermo Protocol is, of course, the most important one, the first one, and that has a criminal law basis. The Council of Europe Convention has a human rights basis and puts the human rights care for victims at the center. And of course, the European Court of Human Rights is very important in this aspect too. There are two very, well, there's two landmark decisions of the European Court in human trafficking, and the last one, the directive of the European Union. If we look at the landmark decisions of the European Court, we see Siliadin and Rancef. See, there are more, but these are the two most important. Siliadin is about a girl from Togo who worked in Paris and who was exploited there for many years. She started to work there as a 15-year-old girl. She was sold by her father through an intermediary in Paris to a family with 4 young children. And she had to work around the clock, sleep on the floor, and really had no rights at all. The court in Paris said, well, you know, every young mother of a young family has to work hard. Well, this was not the mother, this was the maid who was treated as a slave. And the Court of Appeal said, oh, she didn't have her own room. Well, you know, this is Paris. I mean, we don't have much room here in Paris. No, said the court, the European Court, she was held in servitude. And even if she could go out because she had to do the shopping and bring the children to school, take the children to school, the very fact that her identity papers had been taken from her, that she'd been in this situation from a very young age, made that even if she could go out, there was no real freedom there. So Celia then taught us that to be seen as perceived as a slave, you do not have to be in chains. If we look at Ransa versus Cyprus, that's a sex slavery case. Ranseva was a Russian girl who was lured to Cyprus on a dancer's visa, but well, the amount of visa that were issued in Cyprus would lead you to think that they had a dance company on every corner of the street, which of course they didn't. The girl ran away because she didn't want to work as a prostitute, and she was found again by the police, who called in the man, the brothel owner. And this brothel owner didn't really want the girl because she didn't want to work for him. So he said that she was only lying, and the police said, well, you're responsible for her. You asked for the visa, so you take her with you. And the next morning she was found dead. Either she jumped or she was thrown from the balcony at the 6th floor. And her father said, well, this isn't right. Cyprus shouldn't issue these visa for dancers knowing that it is for prostitution, and the police should have listened to her and should have picked up the signs of her being trafficked. And the European Court found fault with Cyprus and Russia. Now, you see 5 P's here. We started out with 3 P's, and they are the P's that define the international approach of human trafficking. We see the protection of victims, which is really the core of the battle of human trafficking. It's not a soft approach, but you need to protect the victims for their own right, to look after their human rights, and on the other hand, protecting victims and prosecution are 2 sides of the same coin. So you really, in order to have successful prosecutions, you would do well to protect the victims. And we see that the number of prosecutions increase. We see also the punishment of perpetrators increase, and this makes me, well, I'm very glad about this, because I've done research into this and found that the conviction rate in human trafficking was not very good. I mean, it was less than 60% in 2011. And if I tell you that even with rape cases, which are difficult cases to prove, the conviction rate was about 75, then you can see that 60 was really not enough. And some of the acquittals were not because there wasn't enough proof in the case, but were because the courts didn't apply the rules as they should be applied. Now this is one photograph. They were also exhibited here in Groningen in front of the town hall. There were 18 photographs of what it meant to these women to be a victim of trafficking. And why do I show you this picture here, where I'm talking about punishments? Well, victims read the rulings of the judges too. Maybe they don't read them, but they have them read by their lawyers. And in one of the rulings of a large human trafficking case, the court said, well, we have to see what the sentence should be, and we will relate that to the time a victim has been trafficked, has been forced to work in prostitution. And in this particular case, he said, well, it was a relatively short time that this a victim had been exploited. but this relatively short time was 9 months. And I don't think that that's very short when you consider that it's maybe 10, 15 times a day that you have to see clients 7 days a week, and then 9 more months. And why? What you see here, this victim says, every day I put down, this little stripe to help me not lose my sanity. Now, if you look at 9 months, it's 270 of those stripes. You can't write down, not with dry eyes, that this is a relatively short period. Now, prevention is a very difficult one. We're not very good at that. But what we should be good at is re-victimization. Once we have the victims, and when we see them, when we protect them, we give them shelter, we help them to rehab, to deal with their traumas, that's when we should be really, really vigilant. And we aren't really. There are too many girls that get that get re-trafficked, and this is something that a lot of attention should be paid to. And then the P of partnership, and those partnerships are various. I don't know if I go, no, oops, I go back. We see the doctor, we need the doctors to pick up the signs of trafficking, because that really, they see them. We see the tattoo people, the tattooists, I don't know how you call that. Anyway, many of the traffickers want to have their name engraved on the girl. Well, sometimes if it's a girl who doesn't say much and looks a little scared, and the man who's there and pays for it is huge, well, have another talk with this girl. We see the hotels. There's a lot of prostitution, illegal prostitution in hotels. There's now, with the Dutch hotel sector, there are all sorts of agreements and trainings how to pick up the signs. If in a room they want clean towels every half hour, if there are condoms everywhere in the room, well, maybe you should pay some more attention. The airlines, they have a lot of there's a lot of airline prevention possibilities in training stewardesses. And we also need the academic world, because there's still a lot of research to be done. And what can you do? Well, first of all, lose the idea of the romantic prostitution sector. This wasn't really what they expected. And I think the idea that prostitution sector is romantic is really outdated. Go on the internet and look for slaveryfootprint.org. You can count how many slaves work for you. It's really well, you can't really say a fun exercise, but it is illuminating, and it's easy to do. It takes you a few minutes, and you will be asked how many computers or tablets you have in your house, or how many jewelry you have, how many cars you have, and then they will show you how many people are working, slaves are working for you, and where. And then the last one. I think many young people now, well, many people all over, are very concerned on how their vegetables are grown, whether any pesticides have been used, and biological, and whatever. But you also have to think back and sit back and think, who picks those berries when they are biological? Who picks the mushrooms when they're only 79 cents? I mean, you are willing to pay maybe €2.50 for organically grown mushrooms. Maybe you should also think of how some of these things can be so cheap. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dettmeijer van Meulen, for the interesting insight. We are now pleased to introduce our second speaker, Laura de Vries. She works as a care coordinator for victims of slavery for MJD Groningen, together with lawyers, social workers, psychologists, doctors, and the police assisting victims of human trafficking in Groningen. Please give a warm welcome as well to her.
Yes, working. Thank you, Paul. I want to tell you a little bit about Groningen and how we try to fight against human trafficking here in this city. I'm Laura de Vries. I work for MJD. That's a small NGO here. We are a small team, actually, who try to fight human trafficking. But we do see a lot of victims during this year. Last year we had 165 victims that we've seen and helped. Some of them were victims that were trafficked from abroad. Some of them were victims from Holland. I think, like Corinne said, we have like a little bit over a third that's Dutch girls. Dutch girls that get into prostitution through love boys, human traffickers they are actually. And we see them get into prostitution just working without pay and being forced with threatening with violence, and they cannot leave. We see them, sometimes they can leave, we think they can leave. The door is open, they can just step out. But they cannot leave because the human traffickers, they make them believe that they cannot leave. They threaten them with their passport. They believe in corruption, in the police, that the police is corrupt. But they also think that their family is going to get hurt if they run away. And sometimes these threats are very true, actually. I am the care coordinator for these victims. I actually take care that these girls or men or children get the care that they need. Sometimes they need psychological care, medical care. They need people that work with them, actually. People that will not see them as a victim only, but also will see them as a survivor of human trafficking, but also someone who deserves a new chance in life and who will be involved in making this new life. This takes a lot of time, actually, because my colleagues, they take a lot of time with these victims. They sometimes take even years, because this is not a problem you just solve in a day. You just not go to the police and tell, okay, I'm a victim, and then I start a new life. You have been through a lot, and you need a lot of care to make a new life, to start over, you cannot just forget about everything that you've been through if you've been through this so long, or even for short periods of time. You have to take your time. They will push away some of our people who work with us, and they will keep on standing there. They will be there, because that's the most important thing. You cannot just leave if the girls or boys, they don't want to work with you anymore. They say, okay, I will go back to prostitution, or I will go back to having a criminal life. We'll be there still. Even if they go back to their human trafficker, we will go back to them and ask them to come back with us. And just ask them. Don't force them. Don't try to do what the human traffickers are doing with them. Just ask them to come back. Ask them if they do want a new chance in life. We do this in a chain collaboration. We have a chain of a lot of organizations in Groningen, like I think 25 at the moment, that we work together with. This is the police, this is, it's all the government organizations actually, but there's also a lot of other organizations like psychologists, I can't think of them right now, but there are a lot of organizations that we work with, and we have a chain coordinator. This coordinator, I bring the science of human trafficking to her from the care, but she also gets the science of human trafficking from other parties that are with us. So then we all look together for the right intervention to help these victims, or to get human trafficking to stop in the companies or wherever it takes place. This is something that's really unique, actually. It's not unique in Holland, but the way we started it, really worked out. We had some organizations working with us that are not participating in the whole of Holland. So we are very proud that we have this experience with this chain collaboration for this time now. I think I put my contacts in here, but that's because I really would like you all to ask you if you have any questions, but also if you see anything, if you see maybe signs of human trafficking, do call me, do email me, but also call the police if you see something that's not correct. You can also call M. I think for you, probably a lot of you will know it. You can call them anonymously. And sometimes you do not feel safe, because this is an area where people work and live that doesn't feel safe. So you can also call anonymously, even from abroad, so you can give your information to them, and they will send it to the police, or they will send it to us. We will see who will be the one doing the intervention. For us in the work, the victim is leading. We do not go to the police with our information. We ask the victim if she wants to talk to the police. If she doesn't want to yet, if she's not ready yet, we wait, and we just make sure that she has the things that she needs. This is it for me. It's a short presentation. Also because of the time, I will keep it short. I think now we have time for questions.
Hello. I would like to thank both of the speakers for being here today, and we would like to start now with a session of questions. So does anyone has a question for both of the speakers? Yes. Is there anyone with a microphone? Yes, thank you very much. Just one moment.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, okay, the guy there with the blue shirt. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, thank you for your lecture, both of you. My question is that for the human trafficking concerning the restaurant work and the household work, I think it's really to detect where it happens, but for the human trafficking in prostitution in Holland, I really do not see a problem of finding it, because if you just go to the Muurstraat or to the Nieuwstad, you will see all these slaves. So why is it so hard to find them and rescue them? Isn't the enforcement of the policies the hard problem, instead of detecting where this happens? Or am I confused? Because they really do not look like they're working voluntary when you walk through the street. So
I can understand that you have a problem with that. We have a licensed prostitution situation in the Netherlands. Oh, it's not working? Is it working now? Yeah, okay, excuse me. Well, with the prostitution policy that we have, prostitution is legalized and licensed. And they are being, law enforcement goes to look at, to control, does the control over there. And if they go into a room and ask a woman for her papers, get the papers, and sometimes even ask, it looks as if maybe you're not doing this voluntarily. And if the woman says, no, I really am doing this voluntarily, it is very difficult to, at that time, say, no, you're not voluntary, you do not work voluntarily, you're being forced, because you do not have any proof of that. And the trafficker, when he sees that the policeman is within the room too long, will also take actions. So this is a difficult part. And what the police do is they try and get into contact with these women and see them more regularly, earn a little bit of their trust. So in the end, you must understand that very often these women have been told that the policeman coming in, that he's corrupt, and that he will also take advantage of you, or maybe even sell you on to somebody else, or he will just send you back home, and then your family will get killed. I mean, that's all this area of threats around these people will prohibit them from telling the truth, and sometimes it takes quite some time.
yeah, because when I study philosophy, and the prostitution street is just next to it, and then when I cycle to my college in the morning, and then I see this court of justice, and then I see this dark windowed automobile with a Bulgarian or Polish number board with 3 girls in it, and I see him driving around, and then I see the police driving. I really think it's absurd that everybody knows that, all right, what is happening there is definitely not legal and is a wrongdoing, but somehow we cannot prevent it, or that's really what strikes me. So
I think you're absolutely right. I remember once, I told you about Olga, this girl from Bulgaria. I was in Sofia with several high-up officials of the KMAR, the police, the prosecution, and we came back by plane. And in that very near to us, there were 2 young women. They had this little basket with a small dog in it, and there was this huge man who was escorting them. And we were waiting for our luggage, and we saw them, you know, also standing practically next to us. And we said to each other, this is ridiculous. We see this happening under our very nose, and we are the ones who have to stop this. And this was, after this, there was a project, and it's still going on, of the KMAR, the military police, who do the control, have a control function at the border and at Schiphol, that sometimes they're sent back. But this is also a hard part to convince the judiciary of, because they say, well, with prostitution as a legal profession in the Netherlands, if somebody gives these women a lift to come from Bulgaria or Romania into the Netherlands, well, what's wrong with that? And I think that a lot is wrong with it. It's in the law that it's wrong, and very often they've been misled, or there's an abuse of their vulnerable situation, sometimes even force. And maybe in the beginning they still think it's all okay, but it's not okay once they are here in the Nieuwstraat or De Wallen or any of the other parts. So yes, maybe we should think again of what we want with prostitution, because when the ban on brothels was lifted in 2000, we didn't really know yet these gulfs of migration and what that would entail. We then still thought of the Dutch prostitute who could, you know, was a forcible woman and could take care of herself. That woman doesn't really exist anymore. So yes, it is a very difficult problem. Like I said, you can't really say which policy is better from the perspective of human trafficking, but that we didn't really succeed in the goals we had at the time of lifting the ban of brothels, I think that you two will agree with me. That hasn't worked.
Yes, and we also, in the work that we do, we still see a lot of girls that didn't work in the windows. They work in homes of people, neighbors.
Yes, another question here.
There's first a question over here.
Hi. Thank you both for the lecture. I have two questions, if I may. My first question is, well, it's actually relating to a story that I read about and heard about, and it's a story of a well-known girl here in Holland, Maria Mostert. She was a victim of a lover boy, and she was also gang raped. And what I understood about reading her book, she was talking about a project for girls who have also experienced what she experienced, and that she went to India because they had a certain project to help those girls, to empower those girls, so that they can build a future for themselves. And my first question is, are there any projects at this moment for this, this particular problem for young girls? And I'm talking about ages from 12 to 18, for instance. Are there any projects, international projects to help them?
The project in India flopped, so I'm not going to promote any form of project like that, because it was really out of control. There is a project specifically for these girls, for Dutch victims of human trafficking, of lover boys, that is going to start, well, somewhere before the summer in Rotterdam, which is a closed, partly closed, partly open institution for minors and adult young women victim of internal trafficking. And of course we also have in Leeuwarden, via Friesland, we have a project destined specifically for these girls.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, seeing that we are experiencing a very long economic crisis, the government is going to be cutting back on a lot of aid, help to different organizations, different NGOs. is this particular branch within the nonprofit sector, is that sector going to experience cuts? So that even if you want to start new projects that because of the financing, the goal might not be reached.
You want to answer
we
that?
do experience cuts. Yes, it's the whole country has to cut down, so we as well. Yeah.
And I've seen that too with, for instance, Fair Work, an organization that helps victims of human trafficking, although now they're getting back on their feet again. And well, one of the other things that worries me is the transition of youth care going over to the municipalities, because that, together with cuts in budgets, will, I'm afraid, lead to, well, I would say I hope more effective help, but I fear less help. But we'll have to see about that.
Okay, we have another question here at the fourth row, the woman with the red t-shirt. Yes.
Hi. So I'm somewhat familiar between the Nordic and you mentioned the German, Dutch, Swiss model. And to me, it makes very much sense to adopt the Nordic model, whereas since it is the lack of supply that cannot meet the demand, which sort of fuels this trafficking of sexual exploited women into the country. And so what I'm wondering is that what are the barriers that are keeping countries like Germany and Holland from adopting a Nordic model?
Well, if you have another hour, first of all, the Nordic model, and specifically Sweden, is a very adamant pleitbezorger. They really want this system to be adopted everywhere. And we see now that the European Parliament has recently adopted a resolution that might advise all countries of Europe to adopt the Nordic model. But if I look at the Nordic model, what they fight there is prostitution and not human trafficking. And I can give you a few examples of that. If you look at the amount of trafficking cases before the judge and that have led to a conviction in the Netherlands, and you compare it to what's happened in Sweden, then their trafficking cases are not even a tenth of what they are in the Netherlands. They have many prostitution cases, but they don't really look behind the prostitute. They look at the customer. And if you would think that in Sweden there's no prostitution, then you're very much mistaken, because there's prostitution everywhere. So what we really have to look at is whether or not, well, whether one or the other of the policies leads to less victims of trafficking. And we can't really say that the Swedish model leads to less trafficking, because there the trafficking is, well, it's under the radar. We don't really know it. And one of the other examples I can give you, I spoke to my Swedish colleague, who is, by the way, works for the police and is not an independent monitoring mechanism. So I think that too doesn't really help her objectivity, so to speak. I talked to her about the internal trafficking, and I organized an expert meeting on that with a few countries that have that discern the same problem as we do. And she said to me, yes, we look at the internet now and we see advertisements of young girls who advertise just 18. And when they advertise just 18, we know they're below 18. So I asked her, then what do you do? And she said, well, we try and find them and try to persuade them to take another profession, to stop with what they're doing. Now, what we do, if we see an advertisement like that, we think this is a minor who is into prostitution, which is illegal. who is behind it? Who is making money out of this? And that's trafficker. So this is a different way of dealing with the same problem. I'm not really saying that the one is, that we know for sure that one is better than the other, but I do know that you can't say that the Swedish model will in the end lead to less trafficking. You can't prove that with any data, not even with estimates. Okay?
No questions? Yes, for there.
Sorry dat ik dat...
Thank you very much for your talk. I have a short question. Seeing this human trafficking as a system of problems, or as one big system problem, I think that traffickers play a very vital part in it. And I was very interested in how people get into trafficking, because I've never heard a child say, whoa, I'm going to be a human trafficker when I grow up. And I think that these perpetrators are a really important part of the problem.
I think that's a very good question, because what I think you will agree with me, many victim organizations say, why do they all want to know so much about the victims? The age and where they come from and their background and their intellectual capacities. Why not go after the traffickers and ask them what and why? When I did my jurisprudence research, I tried to find whether there were any psychological or other reports on the traffickers. There wasn't. Every time that the prosecution wanted to report, the defendant declined or refused to cooperate. One of my staff is now doing her PhD on young Dutch traffickers, and she will also go into the prisons or youth prisons to talk to them. What's your background? Why? Try and find out why they're doing this. Money is one of the big things. If we look, for instance, at the US, we see that gangs that have in the past occupied themselves with robberies and all that kind of, well, work to get their money have shifted their interest to human trafficking, which is easier, less conspicuous, gets you more money, and once you've crossed the barrier or threshold of towards this kind of criminal behavior, which is, I mean, it's really bad to use people in that way, like you asked. How come you cross that threshold? Well, I think it's in many ways it's money driven because it earns you a lot more money. And what I'm afraid with, we used to have a lot of those youth gangs. We don't see them so much anymore. And seeing, well, other countries where they have this same problem and where they have seen these gangs and seen what they've done, that maybe we need to look further and look, well, whether or not it's more of a gang thing than that we know of.
We work together with someone who was a human trafficker. He is convicted and he did his sentence. And we work together with him now to do prevention, because he is a human trafficker, but he was also a victim of another human trafficker. So we try to do some prevention on schools and talk to young boys as well about this problem.
We have a question here in the first row. Yeah, Hannah.
I would like to ask a question particularly to Laura de Vries. It's an abstract image right now for me to help prostitutes to come out of the prostitution or forced prostitution. How can we imagine it practically? After you get a call that there's forced labor, that there's sex slavery, how is it?
It depends. It depends on which state the girl is. If she is coming out of prostitution, if the police call us and they say, okay, we have a prostitute now, my colleagues call me and say, okay, this prostitute wants to quit today, we just took her from the window, then I start calling to find shelter elsewhere in the country. Because most of the times when my colleagues find the girls in Groningen behind the window, we cannot keep them here because this is their surrounding, their traffickers around, everybody who knows them is in the street, and they don't really have a safe place here, so we find shelter elsewhere. But sometimes you also find them in an earlier stage. Today, this girl, she was 13, came in the office, and her parents got her out of this network. I think they were just in time. And then you just start talking and try to build normal life again as soon as possible.
Yes.
How often do you see women being traffickers?
I didn't catch that.
How often do you see women being traffickers?
We see them very often. They have themselves been victims of trafficking, and this is their survival method. And of course, well, I didn't mention that because, well, I didn't have time to mention everything, but we have the non-punishment clause, and that means that if somebody who is in a trafficking situation and commits a crime, that then there should be a possibility not to prosecute or punish that person. Doesn't mean that you will never be punished, but that there is this possibility. So this is, well, like Laura said, the trafficker who had been trafficked himself. Yes, that really can happen. I can't really give you any figures on that, but we do know that.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, over there. The woman with the white, with the yellow t-shirt. Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering, we talk a lot about the victims and the perpetrators, but for me it seems that what is missing is what about the demand? Do we have enough understanding about why this problem is still here? Because for me it seems to be that the people get involved in this business and the prostitutions because there is a lot of profit. But do you think that's why this it still continues to be a problem? Because maybe there is not a lot of research why we still have this problem in here. Because I don't know, it seems for me that we are talking a lot about victims and the perpetrators, but not focusing a lot why there is still a demand for prostitution.
Well, demand applies to all forms of trafficking, not just prostitution trafficking, but also the cheap mushrooms, the cheap clothes, but also the new kidney or the surrogate motherhood. So demand is something that we see on all levels of trafficking. And yes, we see that with trafficking for prostitution too. And some countries will say, like we talked about Sweden, that they do something about the demand by criminalizing prostitution or the demand for prostitution. Other countries say that when you do that, it will all disappear under the radar. So there's different ways of looking at that. You cannot say, I forbid prostitution and that will end the demand. That's really ridiculous because you can't say that. But you can do other things. This is one of the good things, I think, in Sweden, is that they talk about this thing in schools, whether or not what's a normal way to have relations with women, and so this is something I think that could be part of it. Going to prostitution and talk about this in schools. Yesterday, I don't know if any of you have seen it, Eva Jinek on her program yesterday afternoon, she had 4 or 5 guests, and she brought about the topic that one of our parliamentarians had proposed to put a minimum age for visiting prostitutes, and that this minimum age should be 21. This is really a very new proposal. And this was talked about with the group, And I think it was Georgina Verbaan who said that there was something romantic about 16-year-old boys going to prostitutes. I don't think that that's romantic. And I thought that the discussion, well, I wasn't there, so I couldn't really do anything about it, but it could have gone another way. But at the same time, it was kind of ridiculed, this whole proposal. And this is one of the things that I said earlier. Talking about prostitution very often in the Netherlands gets you into a state of ridicule. Either you're prudish and old-fashioned, or you're liberal and modern, and these two will never meet. And I think that we should step over this and try and find a way of discussing this.
Yes, yeah, she's the one with the yellow t-shirt.
You have mentioned something about new regulations being considered, about basically the shift from everything that is not explicitly forbidden is allowed to everything that's not explicitly allowed is forbidden. And what consequences do you think is going to have for the prostitutes? And are you in favor of such regulations? And I see you're a bit reluctant to say what regulations there should be, but I mean, there must be something in your personal experience or in the research that would suggest that this works and this does not work.
I think that the new law will offer more unification of regulations, and I'm in favor of that. Although the new law, as it has now been amended, doesn't really give enough body to really change the regulations. But what I do see is that some of the big cities have agreed to have the same regulations, so it will not really matter whether you're in one town or the other. But I think that the new law will give a little, it will be a little better, but I'm really disappointed that it wasn't adopted by our Senate. I don't know how you think about that.
Yeah, I do feel the same. I still do also believe that the new law will have to, we have to see what it does, but because they taken out a lot of things, then I think there will still be a lot of things wrong in this industry. And we cannot all change it by law, but I think the law could do a lot of good for this industry and for the people that work in this industry.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe there is a question over here. Yes, can you raise your hand, please? Yes, thank you very much.
Can you please pass it over?
Thank you for the talk. I was just wondering, a lot of the focus was on sex trafficking in the Netherlands, and I was just wondering, do you think it's the major issue within human trafficking, or is it just more visible maybe, or easier for the media to cling on to, because, you know, everyone's mother, sister, daughter, whatever could end up as a victim of sex trafficking? So do you think it's simply just more visible or more prevalent within the Netherlands is the major issue?
It is definitely more visible in the Netherlands. The criminalization of labor exploitation dates from 2005. If we look, for instance, at the Belgian situation, there the criminalization of labor exploitation has predecessed the Dutch system about 10 years, and there it's about 50-50 the victims of labor trafficking or sex trafficking. If we look at the worldwide trafficking issues, I think that the labor trafficking may even be bigger, but in the Netherlands we see more of the sex trafficking, and the problem is that everything about trafficking is the more you focus on it, the more you target it, the more you see. So you can't say that a country with 1,700 victims is a lot worse than a country with 50 registered victims, because it could very well be that the country with the 1,700 really looks better. But it's difficult to compare this.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Otherwise, I would like to ask one question. Regarding the first question he asked, how difficult would it be to banish entirely prostitution, given the fact that we live in a country where unfortunately everything is allowed and everything must be legalized? And what you often see is that it's not only that trafficking is the main issue, but it's also always, or most of the time, related with drugs. And given the fact that we have not sharp policies for drugs abuse and for drugs, how difficult would it be to banish all these things together and make it more easier for the law enforcement to actually detect human trafficking?
How about the weapons? Shall we eradicate them too?
Yeah, well, also, yes.
Well, that we already have. This is a kind of a philosophical question, because if, although we are a kingdom, we have been a republic at heart for I don't know how many aeons, and not a country that really complies with all authority. And when in the 60s and the 70s, in all the countries around us, the authority was questioned, we went along, but we were already halfway. So then I think maybe we went a little overboard. And like I said earlier, prostitution is really something that is so hard to get a discussion about. And drugs are also, which is a little bit in the same way. When you say drugs, well, all the discussions that are now about the soft drugs, if you look at the criminality behind the supposedly innocent soft drugs, that's huge. And still, it's very hard to get a consensus on this issue. I think that this is one of the parts. It's we want to, as the Netherlands, we want to think of ourselves as liberal and modern, and drugs and prostitution are maybe a little bit part of that. I don't know how you see that.
Yeah, I think like the demand won't ever stop, so then the prostitution won't stop.
Yeah, but it will be easier to detect them if you know that prostitution is illegal everywhere. So it will be more difficult to hide them. Of course, it's possible, but it will be more difficult.
Well, I don't think it's going to be more difficult. You just make it more difficult for the traffickers to...
yes, and that's a step, I believe.
You just take a layer out, because now you have a legal layer where the criminals can come in and they can work in a legal sector, but still you won't take away the demand, so you won't take away the people that will use drugs and prostitutes. And if we don't see it, you don't know what happens there. And I think the circumstances under which the people working in this industry will work if you don't legalize it, maybe even worse than they are now. I'm not sure, but I think the possibilities are, because the girls that we do see and the men that we do see that come out of the not legalized prostitution or labor, they have been through much worse things. The situation they were in, the living situation, and the things you see about the Chinese people baking these
shrimp crackers.
These things are very bad, and this is in the not legalized industry.
Okay.
And maybe if you think that law enforcement only targets the licensed prostitution areas, that's not true. They also target the illegal part of the prostitution. Even now, without the new law, there are many areas where prostitution is illegal. Minors is illegal, but there's a lot of demand for young girls. I mean, so there is also a sex trafficking with young girls. that is not in the licensed areas, that is in industry areas or camping sites, and then you have to find them via the internet, and you have to, as a client, you have to do a lot of driving around to in the end come at the place where you find this girl, and this will be in a garage box or something like that. That's why I recommended that clients of sex workers that know or should reasonably have known that this girl or woman was a victim of trafficking, that they should be criminalized. This is something different from all clients of all prostitution. So if you go to the licensed area, then usually, well, we know that there are trafficked girls there too, but there is more law enforcement there. But if you go do many detours just to find a girl in a garage box, well, maybe you should have thought better and not done this. And there, I think that this kind of demand, you should attack that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Any other questions? Or okay, I believe we don't have much time, but yes.
I just want to say some final words. I think we just have to watch the time. First of all, we really would like to thank you for a very interesting and important and overall, I think, mind-moving and also heart-moving lecture and discussion. On behalf of the Studium Generale and Escaping Barcode Life, we would like to thank Mrs. Dettmeijer van Meulen very much for coming to honor us with her presence, and as well Laura de Vries for coming to honor us as well with her presence. And we have some small presents as well.